Guys, welcome to the show. I want to start with a question. Which of these two performances was crazier? Kelvin Kiptum, a human being, running 2 hours, 35 seconds for a marathon, or Sifan Hassan, a woman, running 2:13:44 6 weeks after medaling in the 1500 meters at the World Championships? What is blowing your mind more of those two stats?
Let me try to answer your question, John, in a roundabout way. I woke up a Sunday morning, night after a wedding with my Cornell boys. By the way, if you're an ex-Cornell runner and you haven't joined the Supporters Club, join today. Let'sRun.com/subscribe. And I looked at the clock. I'm in the Mountain Time Zone. And it's like 8:31. And I thought, that's 9:30 Chicago time, 9:31. I'm like, wow, the Chicago Marathon's ending, like right now. Like 1 minute, because I predicted a 2:02. I'm like, it could have already ended. And I literally went to Let's Run. I click on streaming. I see NBC Chicago. I click on that. And what do I see on my screen? I see this, it's Kelvin Kiptum hugging Kerry Kapankowski at the finish line, and closed captioning is on. It says, amazing. And I'm thinking, they look really, really happy. Of course, Chicago is the only world marathon major that doesn't have a clock at the finish line consistently. By the way, the broadcast is terrible. I'm going back to watch some of it. Every year I say I'm going to offer my services to Chicago, and every year I don't do it. But I'm convinced that the three of us with iPhones could broadcast this better than they do. But I was like, wow, this guy is the greatest thing we've ever seen in the marathon. Sorry, Eliud Kipchoge, you're the greatest of all time in the marathon, but we've never seen anything like this. I mean, that's what we're going to spend the whole show talking about. But then my roommate was checking out. His car wasn't starting. I had to walk outside. I come back. The women's race is over. And I see 2:13 for Son. I was like, oh my God. I visibly gasped. I was like, I think I was just as impressed by that. It's just wild.
All right, so Robin talked for about 2.5 minutes and didn't actually answer the question. Well, then maybe you can do a better job.
Kelvin Kiptum, no questions asked. Kenyan journalist Muturi Mutuota said it best on X. It is clear I don't know this sport anymore, he said. Essentially to comments that this guy's run faster in his 3 marathons than Gebrselassie, Tergat, Kipchoge. I mean, none of us, let's be fair, right? None of us knew who this guy was a year ago.
Absolutely not. Yeah, absolutely no one did. He'd run 58:42 for the half marathon in Valencia, but that was the race where Kibuat Kandie set the world record. I mean, he was more than a minute behind the winner in that race, so no real reason to remember him from that.
And now if I look at the all-time marathon times, I don't see Eliud Kipchoge on top. And I look at the top 6 times. I see Kelvin Kiptum's name 3 times. Eliud Kipchoge twice. Kenenisa Bekele once. He's shifted the paradigm. He's doing stuff in these races that we've never seen before. In his 3 marathons, he's closed in 60:15, 59:45, and 59:47. No one else has ever closed a half marathon faster than 60:33.
You mean a full marathon? It's astounding. I mean, let me read from my unpublished week that was. In less than a year, he's run a 2:01:51 course record and fastest debut ever in Valencia, 2:01:25 course record in London, 2 flat 35 world record in Chicago, 3 races, 3 wins, and an average time of 2:01:17.7. Eliud Kipchoge's career in the marathon started off incredibly well as well. 2:05:30 win in Hamburg, 2:04:05 runner-up in Berlin, and 2:05 win. His average time was 2:04:51.7. Now, super shoes weren't a thing back then, so let's look at how far off the world record the 2 men were in their first 3 races. In Kipchoge's first 3 races, he was an average of 78.7 seconds off of world record pace. For Kiptum's, it's an average of just 8 seconds per race off the world record.
Look, I agree with you guys that what he's doing is unprecedented. The Kelvin Kiptum phenomenon is insane, that he's gone to the marathon and just continues to crush the second half. He runs this thing like a track race. He just goes out. He said at 5K, he knew he was going to get the world record in Chicago. And he still had company through halfway, but he was just like, well, I'll just make my normal move at 18 or 19 miles, which most people don't have the luxury of doing that. You're usually hitting the wall. At some point in a marathon, you're going to start hurting. He said he's never felt pain in a marathon. Now, we can kind of debate about what he meant by that. Does it mean he was actually in like serious pain, or was he hurting? Did look like he might have been hurting a little bit towards the end. Maybe something was lost in translation. But this is a man who has made this 26.2 mile distance just look extraordinarily easy. It's not supposed to be easy. It's not supposed to look easy. And even Kipchoge, you could see that sort of grimace, the smile he'd get at some of the races. He did make the marathon look easy at some points, but Kiptum's made it look easier than anyone ever. And that said, my mind's still more blown by Sifan Hassan. I don't think you guys are properly appreciating what she's done this year. She runs the London Marathon, but doesn't really train like a marathoner. She does her last month of prep in Ramadan. She stops to stretch out halfway, gets dropped. Paula Radcliffe's pleading for her to drop out. She comes back, wins the damn thing over one of the greatest fields ever assembled. Then goes to the track, runs 3 events of the World Championships, almost wins the 10K, gets the bronze in the 1500 and the silver in the 5000. Then 6 weeks later, comes back to the marathon and wins Chicago in the second fastest time ever. People will run faster than 2 hours and 35 minutes in the marathon. Even someone not named Kelvin Kiptum eventually is going to do that. I'm not sure, as long as I live, I'll ever see someone win 2 World Marathon majors and a medal in the 1500 at the World Championships in the same year. Hassan, her performance was more impressive when you take that into context. That's my opinion.
It certainly may be harder to do, but I don't appreciate it quite as much. It's kind of like the decathlon. Like, it's super hard to do all 10 events, but I'm just talking about which is the peak performance that most blew me away. And I'm with Weldon. It's Kiptum. So yes, like, can you imagine Narv Nordas getting a running 2 flat 30? I mean, well, I guess Hassan didn't run the world record. Narv Nordas runs 201. You know, if you heard the Goose that ran 201.59 marathon and got in second place, I'd been like, okay, that's crazy.
I guess. Well, no, here's the thing.
John, you say that. Hey,
I say no one could ever do it. Would I be shocked in like 2027 if Jakob Ingebrigtsen decides to do what Hassan did this year? I actually could see that happening. I'd be extremely impressed, but I don't think it's totally impossible for Jakob. And of course, we were going to get a Jakob Ingebrigtsen mention on the podcast, even though track season's over. You didn't think we'd let it go that easily, people.
I'd already seen Hassan shock the world and win the London Marathon versus one of the best fields ever. I mean, I guess this is 44 days after the World Championships in the track. And she did run almost 5 minutes faster. But I don't know. I already was putting her as one of the top marathoners out there.
Okay, then I'll come back and say I already knew Kiptum could run this fast because we saw him run 201.25 in London, closing in 59.45 on a shitty weather day. So we all knew he was capable of this performance. If it wasn't going to come this year, it was going to come next year. The only reason that anyone was having doubts is he said he got a late start in his build-up because of a groin issue, and then because the rainy season impacted his running. But then Ed Eyestone said multiple times on the broadcast, he was like, well, I was actually kind of badgering him, and he eventually said he thought he was in better shape than he was ahead of London. So when you put that together, plus the better conditions in Chicago, it's not, I mean, it is crazy to see those numbers actually next to his name, but he said before the Chicago, he thought he'd run 2 flat at some point. He just didn't think it would be this soon.
What have we learned in 2023? When they don't talk about the world record, they break it. Remember when when Kipchoge slow rolled her, was it the 1500 world record?
Do we go there now? I mean, John, you mentioned 2 hours.